what links all of you is the fact that, to my mind, you've all been pioneering solutions across these kind of 3 pillars of climate empowerment that I talked about a moment ago. It strikes me that in the case of climate awareness, Harry and Renewable English is an exemplary example of that. From a climate well-being perspective, the On est Prêt initiatives here in France, Ludovic, speak really nicely to that pillar. And Dani, from a climate action perspective. But first off, it strikes me that all 3 of you have channeled your own emotional energy into developing these climate solutions. I want to start by putting a question to all 3 of you in turn, which is, at what point did the climate crisis begin to resonate personally for you? And how did your story develop from there? And Dani, I'll start with you.
Thank you. 5 years ago, with my firstborn, I embarked on a journey of low waste and not toxic lifestyle, and I would carry glass jars to restaurants for pickup food to avoid at all costs single plastic use, and at the same time I would be flying, and I had no conception or understanding of the measurements of amounts of emissions in my activities. And last year, during the summer of 2022, that was a huge wake-up call and panic, seeing that there were departments in France that had no water in their taps, and that led me to starting to discover that there's mosquitoes that transfer very important sicknesses that are arriving near us, and I started realizing food disappearance and stories of people around me that really shifted my understanding, and so I decided to drop everything, stop my work, and just focus on climate. I founded an organization called I'm Your Protector, which brought people from communities in conflict and who were enemies to stand up for each other and be each other's protectors and transform that way their relationships. So going from being enemies to have each other's back. And there's some learnings from that that are relevant to the climate action. And so that's how I channeled this into discovering 4 patterns and 2 insights that led to the creation of Climate Protector that we'll talk after, but that was my tipping point.
I'm really excited to hear more about, and we'll come on to this in a moment, about how the I Am Your Protector initiative kind of inspired climate protectors, and I encourage anyone to look into both these things, but I Am Your Protector particularly as well. Harry, your personal journey into the climate space.
Well, it's been a long one. But I've been involved in activism in general since I was about 4, so that was an awfully long time ago. But I've been teaching English and teaching for about 15 years, and I realized that when it came to materials, when it came to things to do with the climate crisis, to do with the climate, there was nothing. The books, there was one unit that was about the polar bears are dying. And I realized that this was in no way relevant to any of my students. And, they'd turn to that page and they'd be like, oh, the environment again, seriously, teacher, like, who cares about these polar bears? In the south of Spain, not many people care about polar bears, apparently. So it just made me wake up and realize we need to do more, because, this was happening across Spain, across Europe, particularly when it comes to learning English. So I realized that we needed to make it more accessible to more people. The idea that the environment and the climate isn't one lesson in your book. It's every lesson in every book, and it needs to be connected throughout. So that was kind of the kick that I needed to get started with Renewable English.
Fantastic. Ludovic.
Yeah, I loved your question because you talked about emotion, and for me my way was really emotional, because I started to understand the climate crisis years ago. I started to change my behaviors from day to day, but I was not really engaged. And one day I decided to go in Lesbos in Greece to help migrants to go through that journey. And I realized that there was a big problem that I never knew before. And there is a French doctor who is called Alice Debiol, and she talks about it. She says you start from point 0. It's like unconsciousness. You start doing something, but you don't really realize. And then I went to Lesbos, and it was the first step to me to realize that there was a big problem with migration, which was systemic, which was politic, and which drew the life of the people there. And after some time, I started digging. So I guess it's like many people in this room. When you understand the problem, you start digging inside. And then I discovered that this was not the only problem, migration. It was also climate problem. And this was the second step. And the third step, as she described, the doctor, the third step to me was I realized that all those problems, climate, biodiversity, migrants, and we can talk also about feminism, all the problems that we have in the society are interrelated. And then I started to get deeper and deeper in this, and I realized that climate change was huge, and I started to make more and more actions on my own first. And after 1 year creating associations and trying to move the people around me, I understood that this was not enough, and I should join an NGO that was able to reach millions of people. And that's where I discovered Prêt. For me, was the good example to be able to reach new public.
Fantastic. So, obviously this session's entitled Beyond Eco-Anxiety. And when we were brainstorming together for this session, one thing that came up time and time again was this idea that, or this question rather, of should we move beyond eco-anxiety at all? Is that the right way of conceptualizing this issue? I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on this. Should we be moving beyond eco-anxiety at all? And what does moving beyond eco-anxiety look like? Harry, I want to put this question to you first.
Well, for me, it's a funny one because you hear the word anxiety and you immediately think, oh, that's a terrible thing. That's really bad. That's an awful, horrible thing. We must avoid that at all costs. And there was a big moment for me when I was speaking to Clover Hogan a while back. And it slipped when I said people suffering from eco-anxiety. And she said to me, well, it's not really suffering. You're experiencing eco-anxiety. And to me, it's absolutely key to help you move towards the action side of things. And you were talking earlier about the different emotions that people feel with eco-anxiety. And the fear side of it, obviously that's not good. We need to move beyond that fear of eco-anxiety and move to the motivation side of eco-anxiety and how it can push you to make those differences. It can push you to help, make a difference and not feel so scared by it maybe, but actually feel empowered by it and join those collective groups and move with eco-anxiety and harness it rather than try and get rid of it, because we still need it. We need that urgency. And I mentioned before when we were chatting, when we were brainstorming, that it sounds terrible. I'll let somebody else speak maybe so it doesn't have so much feedback. So shall I move on to Dani now?
Dani, sorry, Harry, about that.
I think there's a couple. I'm not sure it's on. I think there's a few concepts that are relevant here. One is the difference between hardship and injustice. And I think they're often conflated, but actually hardship can be conducive to tremendous resilience and joining efforts. And we see that when there's natural catastrophes, very often people stand up for each other and help each other, and even internationally, people pour funds to support them. On the contrary, on the opposite of the spectrum, there's injustice. And injustice leads people to division, polarization, hatred, violence. And so how do we shift from the feeling of injustice to the feeling of hardship so we can take action? Another thing that struck me was the silence. It's the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, and yet no one's talking about it, at least for the people who are not already engaged in climate action. It's a topic, and in my 5 months of talking to everyone about it, 90% of people would say, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to think about it because it's too anxiety driving. And so the fact that we're silent creates this vicious cycle where we don't talk about it because we're too anxious. So we're alone with anxiety, which is probably the most anxiety driving, is to be alone in something. And so by definition, we don't act because we don't think and talk about it. And so how do we transfer that into a virtuous cycle where by talking to it, first of all, we create community because we see that actually pretty much everyone around us is worried about it too. And so by talking about it, we open pathways to action, and by acting, it's the good news is both what's good for addressing and harnessing climate anxiety is also what's good for taking action and for being part of the solution. And so by talking about it, we can create a new social norm, bring people in, and I think that's the most powerful part. And then the intergenerational part, which links back to the hardship and injustice, is I think for the young people who have eco-anxiety to feel that their parents and the generation of adults around them have their back and care about it, even if they don't understand it. And I think often people don't dare to think or talk about it because they don't feel they have the legitimacy, because they don't have the knowledge or the understanding. But just by saying, I have your back, and I think for parents, if they can just tell their kids, I want to understand, let's go on that journey together, is the most powerful way of having their children's back. And I discovered an incredible tool for that called The Week. It's a 3-part movie to watch with your families or your colleagues or your peers, and it goes through this whole journey that allows to, I think, get parents and kids on the same page to be able to tackle this in a beautiful way.
Fantastic. We talked about the kind of redressing that intergenerational barrier as being one of the key kind of drivers for moving beyond eco-anxiety, and I think that's such a powerful answer. Ludovic, what do we need to do in order to move beyond eco-anxiety, if we should be thinking of it in that way anyway?
Yeah, it makes me think about that we have to say, first of all, that all the emotions that we can hear behind eco-anxiety, they are rightful. Like fear, like anger, like powerlessness, all those feelings, they're rightful because of the emergency and because of the inaction of the decision makers, right? So when you say this, since 4 years with Prêt, we've met thousands, tens of thousands of people that started activism, and we saw that most of them started activism because they were facing this kind of eco-anxiety that we will describe later. And I want to say that this eco-anxiety is something that you cannot just, it cannot disappear. It's somehow, it's your state of conscience. And when you have this conscience, it's very good because it helps you to take action. And also, like, I mean, for 1 million years, our species just survived because we listened to our emotions. Why we don't put the hand in the water, in the fire? Because it hurts, right? We don't want to be hurt now. We want people to live in peace. That's why this eco-anxiety is something that we have to care for, to take care of the people who feel these emotions, but also to say those emotions are helpful because they're going to help us to move towards action.
Fantastic. But my experience of working with young activists as well, absolutely, so many of them will say, yeah, this is, my eco-anxiety drove me to do what I'm doing now. I wouldn't want to sacrifice that, and nor would we want to sort of just eradicate eco-anxiety as an idea. We kind of, in a lot of the halls of power probably need more eco-anxiety rather than less. So Dani, your this kind of 5-month climate journey that you went on, kind of going around asking people, everyone you could, kind of what their thoughts and feelings were about the climate crisis. How did that help shape the Project Now Climate Protectors? And how did your findings from I Am Your Protector kind of inspire and inform the Project Now?
So I made a pact with myself that I would ask absolutely everyone I encounter how they feel about climate change. I'm not going to lie, I was quite awkward at many instances in the line waiting for something or to the cashier. But I asked people in great positions of power and influence, to my friends, to people I was just crossing path with. And there's 4 patterns that have emerged and 2 insight. One is that as I didn't, until a few months ago, realize at all the urgency and the gravity, 90% of the people I engaged with didn't either, including people of great power and influence who would tell me, I'm not worried because I don't mind being hot, or it's going to be something that our great-grandkids will have to deal with, so it's not something that really moves me now. And it's not a coincidence that most climate action organizations are asking as their main ask is tell the truth. And so in my mind, what we believe shapes what we do, and what we do shapes reality. So in short, what we believe shapes reality. And if we believe that it's in 100 years and it's not a big deal, we're not going to do anything about it. And if we understand the urgency in ways that resonates and it's different for different categories of people, it's really leading to action. And I'll just give two misunderstandings that in my mind are very detrimental. One is the timeline. Everyone who talks about climate hears all the time that it's at 2050, 2100 that things are going to move. And so they feel it's abstract, it's far away, it's intangible. And another one is the increase of 1 degree, 1.5 degrees, which feels so insignificant. And we're not told often that it's an average and not in absolute terms. And as Dani Andrea from the Fresque du Climat, which is an incredible tool, came up with this brilliant metaphor that says it's like having your head in the freezer and your feet in the oven and your body temperature is still average the same, except half is burning and the other half is freezing. And I think if we can understand those concepts and say them in a way that are audible to the public, we can really shift them. And so I see this huge disconnect between the people who know and the people who don't know. And the people who know, for them, it's so obvious. Like me, for 5 years, I was taking my glass jars under the pouring rain thinking I was doing great while I was flying, and I was clueless, and I was well-intended. So how do we make those narratives in a way that are sticky and audible? The other insight was that 90%, which you talked about it, 90% of people would say that they don't want to think about it because it's too anxiety provoking. And so that tells us that what people hear make them feel disempowered, anxious, numb, and paralyzed. And so how do we create those pathways where we can engage them? And so that leads to our vicious cycle to virtuous cycle, where actually the first step is incredibly simple, but it's what is going to unlock everything is just to talk about it. And just by asking every single person we cross paths with, how do you feel about it, makes it not about an expertise point of view, but from a personal point of view that opens all the pathway that then can lead to engagement. The third one is a sense of powerlessness, the idea that there's nothing I can do and there's nothing that is moving. And aside from having empowering component, I think one element that often we don't focus on is celebrating success. And I think it's the most powerful tool for 4 reasons. One is that energize people who are already active. We see that there's a tremendous amount of people who burn out in activism because they don't have celebration. I've heard so many activists saying, I need to win. I need to see that we're doing something that works. And so there's actually a lot of successes, but we don't see them. So what we don't see doesn't exist. So that's one part, but the most important part is that it attracts newcomer. Everybody wants to be part of something that succeeds and moves forward and has something to celebrate. The first part is that it creates a narrative of what's desirable. If we celebrate people who became billionaire with this company and that's the success model, or if we celebrate people who are doing really meaningful, beautiful things that are inspiring, exciting, that makes us feel that we want to be part of that, it creates a new social norm of what's desirable. And so we need to talk about success to make that be the model of what's desirable. And the fourth one is that by talking about the success, it gives a roadmap of how it can be replicated, how it can be tailored, how it can be scaled, so we can have more of it. And it becomes a virtuous cycle, too. And the fourth insight was the idea of unfairness, that why am I asked to be cold at 19 degrees for 3 months in the winter with my kids when other people are emitting huge amounts with actions that they don't even think about? And so this study of Parlons Climat that showed that 80% of people said that they were willing to do a lot of sacrifices under 2 conditions, that it was fair and impactful. But nothing that they can do can be fair or impactful if other people are emitting huge amounts by just simple action. So that shows the importance of entities who are emitting a lot to adopt change in terms of, in absolute terms, they can have the biggest impact by changing their investment, the way they stop using their private jets, etc. But also it becomes something that can unlock those 80% of people who are willing to take action and make big sacrifices if that doesn't happen. And then the 2 insight is that everything is in the hand of a very small number of people who are potentially the biggest change maker. And we see that some people already are taking action with, for example, the Giving Pledge or 200 millionaires asking to be taxed, how those people can use their power and resources for good. And the second insight that was really the key to everything is that my children change me. And the uniqueness of the intergenerational approach, that I think is the most powerful. And talking here for 3 days with everyone who works with boards, with companies, with investors, told me that the vast majority of people who profoundly changed at the dinner table with their kids, because their kids ask them, what are you doing? I'm terrified of what's waiting for me in 5-10 years. What are you doing, and how can we do that together? And so that led to Climate Protectors, which is bringing together outstanding pioneers, both young kids, or teenagers and young adults, and their parents who are in particular in position of influence and power, who have the skills, the capacity, the assets to be able to make major shift, and have them be accompanied with experts who can help them do that in a meaningful and impactful way.
I love this idea of the intergenerational bridging we talked about before. Harry, I know that you've had similar experiences with Renewable English, but in the classroom as well as with parents as well. So talk to me a little bit about how you've bridged that intergenerational divide there.
Absolutely, yeah. So intergenerational in terms of parents and kids, but also teachers and kids.
Right.
Because a lot of the time, when I go into a school or into a class, the teachers say, I don't want to teach them because I don't want them to be scared. But then you start to talk to them and you realize that they're also scared. So that you kind of think, you can't just ignore that problem. It's not a problem that you can ignore and it will go away. It's not, if you've got an ingrowing toenail, you have to get it dealt with. You can't just ignore it. It's the same with that. So I try to encourage them to understand this eco-anxiety, that maybe they also have it, so they can share with their students, you know what, you're scared, but I'm also scared. You don't have to be there and be solid and be super strong about it and say, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about, it'll be fine, we'll find the technology, the carbon capture technology will solve everything, it's not a problem. So helping not only the parents, but the teachers understand as well that the students and the kids need someone to be there with them and to help guide them through it. It's a really important step for me, and it's something that I try and do with my daughter as well. I mentioned backstage there that the other day my daughter was just laying in bed saying, Daddy, I'm scared. I was like, oh, what are you scared about? Well, everything. There's lots of scary things. And I said, you know what? I'm also scared about a lot of scary things, but we've got to see what we can do about that and see what we can change, how we can make a difference with that.
Yeah, fantastic. I've certainly noticed that as well myself, working in kind of climate education programs, that the barrier of engaging the school community to want to open that box and start talking about these things, again, out of just a sort of institutional fear of what it might lead to. But actually, you're right, it's there anyway. It's there anyway. Ludovic, okay, so On est Prêt is launched now, hasn't it? There's the eco-anxiety campaign is live at the moment. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of that. I know that you sort of, On est Prêt funded some research looking at eco-anxiety in France. So what were some of the findings that you found there, and how did that then shape the project, and what does it look like now?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Actually, like I told you, since 4 years, we've been doing some campaigns, and we've been meeting many young people, because we work with lots of influencers, with YouTubers, and the public that we see every day are from 18 to 35 years old. And we saw that they were more and more eco-anxious, and that's why we decided to make this campaign. And first, we wanted to make a study. So we did it with a specialist on eco-anxiety who is called Obseka. And this study helped us understand a little bit more what eco-anxiety means. Not what you think eco-anxiety is for you, but what eco-anxiety really does to you in your real life. And we discovered that in the panel, which is not totally representative of French population, but still the figures are quite similar to other studies, we saw that 75% of the population can be called eco-conscious, which is already a huge amount. And those people, they are really concerned about climate change and biodiversity. But also there is another level that you can reach when you're more and more conscious of the problem. It's when you become eco-worried. And about 20% of the panel was eco-worried, meaning that you think about it all the time. You talk about it with your kids. You think about it when you wake up and when you get to sleep. And then there's the really next level that can be totally overwhelming for the person who has this, what we call eco-anxiety at the last level. And 5% of the panel was in this situation. So that helps us to understand that actually, even if eco-anxiety and all those levels are rightful and normal in case of the emergency that we're facing, still we need to accompany those people to feel better with this. From the eco-conscious to the eco-worried to the eco-anxious people, we have to help them, all of them, with what we can do. And that's why we decided to make this, this campaign. And also I want to say that something happened like in 2022, and you talked about it like last summer, because most of the people who were conscious because they were reading the notes from the GIEC, for example. And when you read this, like most of the people can be afraid, but some people just don't really care or don't really hear the figures. And what happened last summer is that most of the people experienced in real life that the forest that you love, that the camping you went and when you were kids, it's all burned now. So we've met the turning point when solastalgia and eco-anxiety come together, and we saw that this increased a lot the level and the intensity of the eco-anxiety. And also, we understand that most of the people who take action now are about to be eco-conscious or eco-worried. If you're eco-anxious and you're totally overwhelmed by the phenomenon, you cannot be helpful for the planet because you have to take care of yourself. And that's why we decided to take care of the humans so that they can take care of the planet.
Amazing, and I think you can. People can still register, can't they, for the next On est Prêt round of emails and yeah, fantastic. Okay, we've come to time, sadly, but one final sentence from each of you. How can we move beyond eco-anxiety?
Oh, one sentence. Let's not move beyond it. Let's move with it.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more with that. Dani?
For me, this idea of what we believe shapes what we do and what we do shapes reality, of bridging the gap between the people who know and the people who don't know, who are often perceived as evil, but they're really trapped into a world where they have no way of getting the information in a way that is audible for them and sticky for them, and is how do we make those bridges to talk to people who don't know in a way that bring them in. And I think every time we talk to someone about climate or emergency is to think about how do we bring them in and how do we not alienate them.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Ludovic?
I was asked yesterday why we are talking about our eco-anxiety and why are we not talking about the eco-unconsciousness of the decision makers. So I want to say the people who are unconscious, because it's not that they are not aware or they don't know, it's that they know and that they still acting looking like nothing has to change. So I want to say those people, please become a little bit more eco-anxious and then you will start acting. And for the people who are already eco-anxious or eco-worried, I want to say, take care of yourself. We're launching a campaign now with On est Prêt. It started last Monday. And there you can find 15 ways to live better with this eco-anxiety and to use this as an energy to take action. So join us on est Prêt.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I love the projects that you're all running and leading from the front. Thank you all. Can I have a round of applause for the panel today? Thank you.